I know what you're thinking. America? Really, erratic? There are pubs older than America. But on this channel, we don't discriminate. History is history. And in my humble opinion, the Revolutionary War is probably one of the most interesting parts of history. Okay, the 12 most influential people in the American Revolutionary War. Starting off with good old... Once seen as a potential rival to Washington, Lee had the resume to back it up. He was British-born, which was a hip thing to be in 1700s America, a veteran of the 7 Years' War, had fought in Europe and North America, and even served in the Polish army. Wow, surely this beauty of a man won't disappoint. He was loud, sharp, and absolutely convinced he was smarter than everyone, especially Big George. An eccentric guy who was brilliant and not in the good combination you think it is. When the war broke out, he was one of the highest-ranking officers in the Continental Army. Many in Congress thought he should be in charge. He had the experience, he had the swagger, so to speak. But what he didn't have was discipline or humility. At the Battle of Monmouth in 1778, Lee was given command of the advance force, and then he panicked. A great thing to do when you're in a position of leadership. Without clear orders, he suddenly ordered a retreat mid-battle, while Washington's full army was arriving. Anyone else would have been popping the champagne and tap dancing by that point, but not good old Charlie. It was chaos. Washington found him, and in front of everyone, unleashed one of the most strongly worded verbal beatdowns in American military history. I couldn't find any full version of the actual monologue, but multiple eyewitnesses recall being shocked themselves by words. In 1778, yeah, must have been quite something. Afterward, Lee demanded a court-martial to defend himself, which he got, and lost. Hero of Saratoga, or at least that's the story. Gates claimed the credit, though much of it belonged to others, including Benedict Arnold, which I'll go over shortly. After Saratoga, his star rose fast. A little too fast, according to everyone. Yep, everyone. Congress loved him. Whispers started floating around that maybe Gates should replace Washington, and Gates didn't exactly shut those whispers down. That's where things started going sideways. When he finally got his own independent command in the South, he blew it. The Battle of Camden was an unmitigated disaster. He put militia on the front line, which crumbled instantly. Who would have thought? And then, he ran. Yep, he fled the battlefield on horseback and didn't stop for 180 miles. Allegedly, but also really. That's, quite unforgivable. Maybe he was anxious, who knows. And to make matters worse, he had a reputation for scheming behind the scenes, always looking for a way up, even if it meant going around. Washington, ever the professional, never publicly condemned him, but others did. One officer dryly noted, General Gates has the art of rising without merit and falling without disgrace. Ugh, hard. One of the best battlefield commanders the Americans had. Period. He was decisive and usually right. Dangerous mix. He helped win key battles like Saratoga and was on track to be a top-tier leader. Arnold was bold and brave. He fought fiercely at the failed invasion of Quebec, and he was severely wounded at the Battle of Ridgefield. At Saratoga, he was the driving force in the counterattack that won the day, even after being relieved of command mid-battle. He charged into the fight anyway, took a bullet in the leg, and helped change the tide of the entire war. Congress gave credit to General Gates. Arnold got a shattered leg and a slow-burning grudge. But then it all changed. Feeling underappreciated, subtly insulted by rivals, and drowning in debt, Arnold flipped. While stationed at West Point, he secretly agreed to surrender the fort to the British in exchange for money and a commission. The plan was narrowly foiled when his contact, Major John André, was captured with incriminating documents. Arnold then fled to the British. He became the most infamous traitor in American history. This makes him one of the most fascinating figures of the war, a hero turned villain, if you will, a once great leader whose pride consumed him. His legacy is a mix of brilliance and betrayal, and no story of the revolution is complete without him. Before his defection, he wrote, "Having become a cripple in the service of my country, I am left without the means of support." You can almost hear the bitterness. Sullivan led several campaigns, including a controversial one against the Iroquois that devastated entire villages. It was brutal, scorched earth warfare, a deliberate attempt to dismantle the Iroquois Confederacy's ability to aid the British. Entire food stores were burnt, homes and crops destroyed, winter would do the rest. Strategically, it worked. The campaign weakened British Allied resistance in the frontier, but morally it's remembered with mixed emotions. Sullivan wasn't adored, but he got results. He also led forces at Quebec, Long Island, Trenton, and Brandywine. Time and again, he was given impossible assignments and showed up anyway. He took hits, kept moving, kept pushing. In a letter after the Iroquois campaign, he wrote, "The nests are destroyed, but the birds are still on the wing." A cold soldier's truth. He served reliably, took on the dirty jobs, and did his duty. Not clean, but part of the machine that made victory possible. Thomas Paine may have done more for the war effort than any cannon or musket. He wrote the words that stirred a nation. Common Sense wasn't just a pamphlet. It was a call to arms that exploded across the colonies. Published in early 1776, it sold over 100,000 copies in just a few months. People read it out loud in taverns, churches, town halls, and its message was simple. Monarchy is absurd, independence is necessary. Now. When the war started going badly, when Washington's army was cold, starving, and bleeding, Paine picked up his pen again. In December 1776, just days before the crossing of the Delaware, he published the first of the American Crisis Papers. It began with words that still echo today. These are the times that try men's souls. Washington was so moved, he had it read aloud to his troops before battle. Literary fuel, if you will. Paine's genius was his clarity. He made complex ideas sound like common sense. He reminded everyone what liberty meant and what it would cost. He believed freedom was a right that was worth bleeding for. He gave the revolution a voice of fire and unshakable belief in the idea that ordinary people could stand up to empires and win. This man was better known as Mad Anthony. That says a lot. He earned that nickname for his fearless aggression and explosive temper, but more than that, for how he fought, head-on, and with terrifying resolve. Wayne wasn't a calculating intellectual, more like a hammer, and in the Continental Army, that was absolutely vital. He made his mark early on, fighting at Brandywine and Germantown, where he was nearly captured, but his defining moment came at the Battle of Stony Point in 1779, one of the boldest and most surgical operations of the war. The British had fortified a position on a rocky peninsula, surrounded by marshland and tidewater. It was thought to be nearly unassailable. Not to Wayne, though. He took it. He led 1,300 hand-picked light infantrymen in a stealth nighttime assault, ordering them to unload their muskets and rely solely on bayonets. Wayne personally led the southern column and took a shot in the head during the charge. He refused to stop, my man. He was carried forward with his men, bleeding and giving orders. They stormed the fort in 30 minutes. It was a stunning victory. Even Washington was blown away. Congress awarded Wayne a gold medal, one of the very few issued during the war, by the way. But here's the thing, for all my reductive overview of Mad Anthony, Wayne wasn't reckless for the sake of it. He believed deeply in discipline, and his troops respected him for that. He was tough, but he built confidence, not chaos. After the war, he'd go on to command American forces in the Northeast Indian War and win a decisive victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, essentially securing the Ohio Territory for the United States. The Swamp Fox, a ghost in the Carolina backwoods. Francis Marion was the master of guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, disappearing into the swamps before the British could blink. He tied down thousands of British troops with just a handful of men. No big battles, no set-piece glory, just relentless disruption. His campaigns severed supply lines, rattled loyalist networks, and left British generals in a pickle. A very large pickle. One officer even wrote, "The devil himself could not catch Marion." He made his bases deep in swamps, moving silently with his small force, mostly volunteers and militia. Cornwallis and his officers began referring to him with loathing because he was always there and they couldn't stop him. He wasn't conventional, but he was effective, and the Revolutionary War was essentially a war of attrition. So, yeah, he kept the Southern resistance alive when it looked nearly dead. Good job. This Prussian officer shows up to the Continental Army speaking almost no English, carrying a fake title, and was a little sassy from what I can find. That's Baron von Steuben, and thank God he was the way he was, for America. Because without him, the Continental Army might have stayed a confused and undertrained militia. He arrives at Valley Forge in 1778 and immediately gets to work. He completely restructures how the army thinks and fights. He teaches discipline, hygiene, logistics, and battlefield movements. And I don't like stereotyping, but he was the classic example of an angry, cursing, and efficient North German. Imagine it. I can't do impressions, but He writes the Army's first official manual, the Blue Book, which remained in use for decades. The army that emerges from Valley Forge isn't the same one that went in. It's professional, organized, and dangerous. Under his command, they stood and eventually won. Without von Steuben, the American army might have broken apart. With him, it became a force the British couldn't ignore. A former bookseller with a love for artillery, Knox taught himself everything about siege warfare from books. He wasn't a soldier by training, but he had a brilliant, methodical mind and quickly became one of Washington's most trusted officers. His most famous feat? The winter of 75 to 76. The British held Boston, and the Continental Army had no heavy guns. So Knox set off for Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York and brought back more than 50 cannons. That's over 60 tons of metal dragged across 300 miles of frozen rivers, icy trails, and snowy mountains, if you can call anything east of the Mississippi mountains. Anyway, they said it couldn't be done. Well, whoever this they fella is, he's kinda dumb. The noble train of artillery, as it was called, arrived in January, and when the British saw those guns on Dorchester Heights, they didn't even try to fight. Boston was evacuated, the city was saved, and Knox was a war hero. He later became Washington's chief of artillery and was involved in nearly every major campaign of the war. Just 19 years old. 19. A French aristocrat leaves behind his life of insane wealth, his noble, cushy life, his pregnant wife, and pays for his own ship, supplies, and crew to go fight in someone else's revolution. Absurd, but cool. He was already winning in life, and he gave it all up because he believed in liberty. That's the kind of guy we're dealing with here. No big deal. The moment I heard of America, I loved her. The moment I knew she was fighting for freedom, I burnt with a desire of bleeding for her. And the moment I shall be able to serve her at any time or at any part of the world will be the happiest of my life. Right on. Washington saw this passion and made him a major general at 19. The two grew incredibly close. Washington basically adopted him as a son, and Lafayette actually named his own son George Washington Lafayette. Nice. He was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine, took a bullet in the leg, but refused to leave the field until the retreat was organized. And while others often get the credit, Lafayette played a leading role in convincing France to commit to the war. No Lafayette, no French aid. No French aid, no Yorktown. No Yorktown, no America? Later, he led American troops in Virginia, independently harassing Cornwallis, keeping the pressure on, and nearly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence, he took a farewell tour of the United States. 24 states celebrated him like royalty. The message was clear. Lafayette was one of them. After Yorktown, he even said, "Humanity has won its battle. Liberty now has a country." Daniel Morgan was the kind of commander who made sure the Continental Army bled. A frontiersman turned rifle corps leader, Morgan was a tactical genius with a deep understanding of terrain and timing. He came from humble roots, barely literate, worked as a wagoner, and once got whipped in public for striking a British officer. That left him with a lifelong hatred of the British Army, and when the revolution broke out, oh boy was it on. He commanded a crack unit of riflemen and sharpshooters known for picking off officers at impossible distances. He knew how to use speed, terrain, and firepower to break a line. And at the Battle of Cowpens in 1781, he pulled off one of the most brilliant maneuvers of the entire war. He faked a retreat, okay, basic, lured the British into a trap, then slammed them with a perfect double envelopment. My man, morale was crushed, it was a textbook win. And it helped set the stage for Yorktown. Morgan wasn't high society, he didn't care about medals or parades, he was just one of the best battlefield minds in the entire revolution. Gritty and absolutely lethal. Odd number one spot, but hear me out. Born a Quaker, a pacifist, he wasn't allowed to carry weapons growing up. So what does he do? He teaches himself military science by reading every book he can find. My man. No formal military training, just study. And he ends up becoming Washington's most trusted general. When the Southern campaign was a flaming disaster, Greene took over. Yeah, let the Quaker deal with it. The British held most of the territory, morale was non-existent, supplies were worse, somehow, and Greene made a risky and brilliant call. He split his already tiny army into smaller forces and waged a campaign of harassment, exhaustion, and strategic retreats. He said it best himself, "We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again." Then came the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Greene knew he couldn't win outright, so he fought to bleed Cornwallis's army, and it worked. Cornwallis won the field, but lost the war of attrition. Yorktown wasn't far off. Purists would be proud. He was the only general Washington trusted to command an entire front alone. Figures like Gates and Lee had the resumes, but Greene had the loyalty and the clarity. He didn't care about glory, he saw 2 steps ahead and got results. Greene was, in my opinion, the most essential leader in the war, save Big George, of course. Okay, this was a little different. Actually, not really. What did you think? I got a lot of pushback on my last few uploads. Who would have thought that Greek and French history was controversial? Good thing that the United States is a country everyone has similar views on. Again, Like, subscribe, comment, support the channel in any way you deem fit, and drop suggestions in the comments. Bye.